In the evolution of cities, we've come a long ways very fast.
We're 20, 30 minutes away from anywhere you want to be in LA County.
I've worked with a number of prominent cities, and I can assure you that we have the best mayor and city council and executive team in the country.
Here with my friend Mike Pereira, rules analyst for Fox Sports, Fox NFL Sunday. Rules analyst. I mean, what a crazy thing. Before David Hill approached you with this, I mean, would you ever believe there was a job explaining football and officiating to the country? Pretty novel idea.
Really, not at all. I mean, and the fact is, I never thought I would necessarily end up in the media because I really didn't appreciate the media. You know, they would just get on the officials so bad that, and half of my battle when I worked with the league was trying to educate the announcers on the rules, so at least what they said would be correct. And from an official standpoint, honestly, it was very difficult to get criticized by someone who's never officiated before, who doesn't know the rule and is incorrect in his criticism. And so honestly, I never saw myself going into the media. But as I was involved in the NFL, Sam, I realized that part of my job was to work with the media. And so every year I would go out and I would go to the seminars at CBS and ESPN, and I'd go to Fox. And Fox would bring me to Los Angeles, and they'd sit me in a room, big room, in a big square, and all the producers and directors and talent were all there. And I'd have to crawl literally under a table to get into the middle of this square. I mean, that's how much respect I got. I mean, I didn't get an open entry into this square. Under the table, and then I would start, and I would go over the new rules and the points of emphasis, and then we would get into other issues. And what was amazing to me is that when I went to ESPN and CBS and NBC, the meetings were short. They were good, but they were half hour, you know. But Fox, David Hill and Ed Gordon took a real interest in getting their analysts to know the rules. And when they did a survey one time, Sam, they found that fans, the second most important thing that the fans expected out of the announcers was rules knowledge. And so I'd I'd stand in the middle of that square, and I would go for hours, honestly, hours. And they were phenomenal. I would go back and forth with Troy. Troy used to ride my butt all the time about certain rules and the way that we called things. And then when I decided to leave the NFL and move back to the West, I got a call when it was announced. I got a call from David Hill, who said, "You're not going to retire. We're going to put something together for you." And even though he had no idea what it was going to be, he just knew that fans wanted to know the rules. And so since I had this really good relationship with them over the years, going each year to their seminars, he said, "You're coming with us." And that's kind of how it all started.
In the prehistoric days, before there were rules analysts, were you surprised at how little people actually knew about rules? I mean, would you meet people who should know the rules and they were in the dark?
No, it didn't surprise me, because if you look at my career, for example, so I officiated my first game in 1970, and it was a Pop Warner football game in East Palo Alto, California. I didn't even want to. I mean, they came to me and said, "Do you want to officiate?" I said, "No." And they said, "Why?" "I don't want to." They said, the guy that asked me, a guy named Tommy Aichista, who was the timer at San Jose State University, who used to run the officiating for this Pop Warner program in East Palo Alto, he said, "Oh, well, why?" I said, "I just don't want to." And he said, "Well, your dad is officiating." I said, "Maybe that's why I don't want to." Maybe. I said, "I've seen him get abused. I've seen him getting yelled at." And then he said to me, I was going to Santa Clara at the time, he said, "It's $10 a game, 3 games on Sunday, $30 cash. And I kind of went, well, maybe I do, because I didn't have any money. I mean, and some of my Santa Clara buddies had money for beer money. I really didn't have any money.
So it was $30 cash under the table. So you
$30 cash.
Started off your career breaking the rules.
Correct. Correct. Never paid a dime of tax on that money. Never did. But the interesting thing enough was that $30, that first Sunday, hooked me for life.
Wow.
It hooked me for life.
What was it
And
about doing
I
it?
don't know. I don't know. It was, in some ways, I think it became a supreme challenge for me. My dad and I had this really weird relationship, and I never felt like I lived up to what I should in his eyes, And we had some tough goes, and I always wanted to be better at him at something.
Huh.
And he officiated on the West Coast, and that first day...
What would he tell you?
Huh?
What would he tell you?
Well, it stemmed back to an incident when I was 14 years old, and I was playing an American Legion baseball game in Lodi, California, middle of summer, 104 degrees. I mean, awful. I was a first baseman, and I dropped 2 pop-ups and struck out 3 times and went 0 for 4. And all I wanted was something to drink after the game. I'm 14 years old, and I went to my dad and said, would you buy me a Coke? And he actually looked right at me and said, you're not worth the quarter it takes to buy a Coke. And I was 14. It didn't strike me that much at the time, but then it did. Then all of a sudden I thought, I'm not worth the quarter it took to buy a Coke in my dad's eyes. And so I would say by the time I was 16, I started chasing the quarter. I wanted to find something. I wanted to find something that my dad would show his approval of, because I felt like, that statement was so powerful to me as I thought about it, that, at 15, I felt like a failure over going 0 for 4 and dropping 2 pop-ups and striking out 3 times. But it was, and I just wasn't very damn good at anything. I was average at best. I wasn't good at school. Never played a down football, played baseball. Ended up going to Santa Clara on a baseball scholarship, thank you, Dusty Baker, because he was drafted by Atlanta, but he had committed to Santa Clara, but he chose to go to Atlanta instead, and it freed up a scholarship I got 1/4 of his scholarship. But I never felt like I made the quarter. I never did. And just the strangest damn thing was officiating. And it was that first day in East Palo Alto, because I didn't know what I was doing. Little kids are running around in circles. Parents on the sideline yelling at me. I have a picture of myself. I looked hideous. I had this long hair sticking out, an old broadcloth striped shirt. But it was like somebody stuck a syringe in me and filled me with adrenaline. It was like what I was looking for something, and it was like as strange as it could be, I found it with officiating. And, when you think about it, I went from Pop Warner, and I went, up through the high school ranks and the junior college ranks and the small college ranks, and then into the PCAA, it was called, and then Big West Conference, and then the WAC. And all the time they did this, my dad was involved with this, but he felt I was wasting my time. And I was, in some degree, because you get so into officiating. My God, you're on the phone with your buddies all the time, the other officials. But the day, before you get in the NFL, you have to have psychological tests. You have the FBI that comes out, does background checks on you and walks your neighborhood. You have to go to New York and meet with all the powers to be in New York. And I went through this whole process and didn't really think I would get in. But I did in 1996. So you're talking about 46 years old. So you're talking about, what, 31 years or something after my dad told me I wasn't worth the quarter it took to buy a Coke. And so I got the call from New York that said, we're inviting you in as an official to the NFL. And so, this is no joke. I asked Jerry Seaman, can I tell my dad? Because he had said, don't tell anybody. And he said, yeah, you can tell your dad. So I reached out to him. He was in Stockton playing golf. And I called the golf course, and he wasn't there. I said, have him call me when he gets there. Not an emergency. 5 minutes later, he calls me. He said, what's up? I said, I got in. He said, you got in what? I said, Dad, I got in the NFL. That was the response I got from him, nothing. And so then he said to me, after 20 seconds of nothing, he said, well, just let me tell you one thing, son. I'm an emotional guy. And I was hardly keeping it together because I knew he was going to finally tell me that I was worth the quarter. And after another 20 seconds of silence, he just said, just don't screw the 49ers. And he hung up.
Wow.
And that night, when I saw him, he said to me, when I hung up the phone, I walked to the first tee. His buddies were all there waiting for him. He said, I put my ball on the tee, and I hit the longest drive I've ever hit in all my life. And that was the way he told me that I was worth the quarter. And I loved the man. I mean, and he passed shortly. After I left the NFL, I came back to spend time with him. And 3 months after I came back to the West Coast, after retiring from the NFL, he passed. But we ended up spending good times together. But it's, if you look back at life, and I think you get to a point right now, and I've been so lucky with all this football stuff that I have done every day since 1970. I've been involved in football and officiating. You know, but when you look back in life, it's fascinating to find those things. Those things that changed your life. Could be a statement, could be a criticism, could be a person. And I think as you grow older, I keep thinking back about these people who changed my life. Who changed my life. People that don't even know they changed my life. A guy who put together a whole campaign and raised money to pay my hospital bills when I got cancer at age 24 without insurance. People that changed your life. I don't know how we got started on this. What was
Oh
it you
boy, I
asked
was
me?
going to ask about
What would you ask me?
overtime.
I forget what you asked me. I'm sorry.
Anywho,
Okay, I guess I'm done right now.
Wow, that's really powerful, Mike. And we didn't even touch on the cancer at age 24.
Yeah, I had Lance Armstrong and I had something in common. I had testicular cancer. Came from nowhere, you know, symptoms that I didn't know. And young guy at age, I think I was 24 then, no insurance. assistant baseball coach at the University of Santa Clara. This thing hits. I went to I didn't know what it was. I went to a Riverside tournament, Riverside College baseball tournament. I was assistant coaching there, and I knew something was wrong. And I went to this doctor in Los Gatos, and he said, "Not good." He said, "It's testicular cancer," and he said, "And I'm not prepared to handle this." He was a doctor in Los Gatos, who, by the way, I had no insurance. So I think the appointment was like at 10 o'clock, and it lasted for about 45 minutes, and he told me to go to O'Connor Hospital. At like 12:15, somebody walked up on my porch and put a bill in my mailbox from his doctor's office, But
So some people change your life for the better.
Yeah, that's true.
Some people change your life.
And I went to O'Connor Hospital. Now, mind you, this is 73, 74, and they said, "Yep, he's right. We're not capable of doing anything about this." And then a guy who was actually my dad's boss, a guy got me into Stanford Medical Center. What a difference. You walked in and said, "Yep, that's what you got. Here's what we're going to do." And then 3 days later, I was on the operating table.
Wow.
And no insurance. How about that? So short and sweet, I had the surgery done. They removed the testicle. This guy in Stockton raised money to pay my bills. Raised money. And he had a car leasing company. And he sent meals to my house in Los Gatos to feed my wife and I. And so when it was all said and done, and it turned out that I had the grade level 2 of the testicular cancer, which means, you know, you were probably going to be okay. It was a 3-year period. And I took 23 hits of radiation into my stomach. And when I could finally play golf again, I went to Stockton, where this guy was with my dad, and they had a lunch with all the people that contributed the money. They all loved my dad. They were my dad's buddies. And how do you sit there when you know these people gave you this money to help get you through this thing? So then I did at lunch, and it was great, and then we all went out to play golf. There was about 30 of us. And I remember I had a testicle removed, but it was the first time I could swing, and not without a great amount of pain. So these guys, I walked out to the first tee at the Stockton Golf and Country Club, and there's the blue tees, the white tees, and the red tees. The blue tees are the championship tees. The white tees are the men's tees. This is, again, back in 73. And the red tees are the women's tees. So here's these guys, and I walk out to the first tee, and there's a set of gold tees. There's a set of gold tees in between the white tees, the men's tees, and the women's tees. And I said, "What tees are these?" And they said, "They're your tees because we don't know what you are anymore now that you're lost a testicle." They set up 18 gold tees around the course. They were phenomenal. They're people that changed my life. They're people that changed my life.
Mike,
You know, can we talk football?
if there's a hallmark of your career as an official, it's that you were always in lockstep with the commissioner.
Yes, right, really, lockstep.
Tell me about some of the run-ins that you had.
I went to the NFL and worked under Paul Tagliabue. He was the commissioner when I started there. And I went back. I was on the field for 1 year when they were going to expand the officiating department. And so they put together this list of 15 people, and they wanted to hire 2, and I'm on this list, and I've only been in for 1 year. And so I'm like, what? And I mean, like, am I that bad? They want to get me off the field in 1 year. But I went through the process with the headhunter, Joe Bailey, who you probably know of, been involved with a lot of the league securing people. And so I went through, and then I went to New York to meet with Tagliabue, Joe Brown, Neil Austrian, all those people back then, and Roger Goodell. Roger sold me on it. I mean, Roger's the one that convinced me that, yep, I'll leave the field even after 1 year if I got the job. And when it turns out that they offered me the job and I turned it down because I was working with my mom and dad in Stockton. They were divorced, and I just didn't feel like I could bail out in a month and go move to New York. So I turned it down, and they all thought I was nuts. And but I got the biggest compliment of my life from them because they called me and said, well, what would it take? And I said, no, it's not what would it take, it's my folks. And they said, well, how about if you worked on the field for another year? And I said, you're willing to hold a supervisor position for me for a whole year? Which, when they did that, I said, I got to take it. I had to take it. And it was interesting that Larry Upson was the other one that got the job with me, and Joe Bailey, who is the one that basically pushed for me after I got the job. You get the job, you know what you get to do? Look at your own personnel file. So I went into my own personnel file and looked at Joe Bailey's reports on me and what he wrote about me. And so I called him after I read it. I said, I hate you. You are an ass. And he goes, what? I said, I read what you wrote about me. And he goes, I wrote everything nice about you. I said, you were the guy. You were the guy that would be eventually the one to take over from Jerry. I said, I will never speak to you again. And he goes, why? I said, because I read your reports and you said, Ed Hockley is an attorney in Phoenix. It will take a ton of money to get him. Mike Carey sells ski supplies, very successful company. It'll take a lot of money to get him. Mike Pereira, he silk screens T-shirts, won't take much to get him. I read that, I would know, gee, many Christmas. But Roger, while he was the guy that kind of made me think he gets it, we did have this because he was headstrong and I was headstrong. And I wrote a book and I talked about a time when he pushed me, when he was really vehement about suspending an official, and I said I wouldn't, and it wasn't a violent thing. It made it sound like it was violent, but it wasn't necessarily violent. But so it's that relationship has been kind of. I don't think he really wanted me to leave and wanted me to stay, and if I did stay, maybe to stay with the NFL Network or something, and then I jumped ship and went to Fox, but you know, it's not the best of relationships.
You seldom hear that official made a great call. You hear about bad calls, but for the most part, officials, in the eyes of fans, are to be neither seen nor heard.
Right.
You have had to, in your job, be critical of officials, and these guys are your buddies and your colleagues. Is that difficult? Was that a difficult transition for you?
I don't think it was difficult because the one thing that I said to them is that I would just disagree with respect, that I would never use bad words, the words like horrible, blown call, terrible. I would never do that. That I would say I disagreed because, and then I would explain to it. I would never say anything worse than disagree. And I think with the exception of one time, I think I've stayed to that. And then I think the other thing with them is that you can, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, but you can accept criticism if it comes from somebody that's done it before, somebody that appreciates the difficulty in the job that they have to do. And while the officials have, just like the players, have a collective bargaining agreement, their bargaining agreement, the officials, they cannot deal with the media. So basically my relationship from them when I left to go to Fox was basically cut. So they couldn't reach out to me, and I couldn't reach out to them. But then again, mean, these were my friends. I mean, these are Tony Careni was the best man at my wedding. And then I'm told I can't talk to my best man at my wedding. You know, and so you've found ways sometimes to talk to them. But I think they still respect me. You know, I was the first. Now they're everywhere. I mean, you go to, you know, Dean Blandino, who had my job in the NFL. He's doing it now with us in Fox. John Perry's doing it at ESPN. Macaulay's doing it with NBC.
Mike Carey did it.
And Mike Carey did it. Gene Steratore is now doing it with CBS. I think in reality, most of the time, it paints officiating in a positive light more than a negative light, because most of the time, we are truly saying that they're right and not wrong. And some people say, well, you have a bias, you're never honest. I don't have a bias. I mean, if I worked for the league, yeah, you could say, okay, yeah, you're biased, and they'd probably be right. If I worked for the league, I don't have a horse in the race anymore. And half the officials, I mean, I've been out of there since 2009 was my last year. Mostly, I don't even know the officials anymore. There's been such a turnover. But in reality, I know the one thing that I'll never forget is that there is nobody other than those of us that have done it that knows how truly good they are and how they don't appreciate the number of decisions that they have to make on the field. They think of a pass interference call, one play, one call they got to make, and maybe it's wrong. But, you know, if you look at a game, and this is no exaggeration, if you look at a game with 150 plays, which is approximately what an NFL game is, I promise you within each of those 150 plays, there's 10 decisions that have to be made. Whether it's contact with the defender on a receiver or motion or formation or the 5 interior linemen, whether they're holding, there's 10 decisions at least. So they got to make 1,500 decisions a game. And I'm telling you right now, they're right 99% of the time. It's a hell of a lot better average than I think I have in anything I do. But yet, they're so underappreciated. And it's now all the way down to the very lowest of levels, to Pop Warner football and high school football. There's such a shortage of officials around the country in every sport because the negative talk, the negative things that people say about officiating, nobody wants to put up with that.
That opens the door for battlefields to ball fields and what you're doing there. Your foundation, tell me about that.
You know, it's all started on a road trip. I take a road trip every year. I drive from Sacramento, California to Bend, Oregon to go see friends. About 5 years ago, I was driving to Oregon, and I make myself a commitment. Once I pass the Sacramento airport, I turn off all noise. No books on tape, no radio, no CD, nothing for 6.5 hours. Because I just want to listen. I just want to listen to what's going on in my head. I want my head to do the talking and not some other external output. And so I was driving, and I had just met some homeless veterans down here, saddened by it. And I'm thinking about how our veterans are so oftentimes underappreciated, kind of like officials. And so I'm driving, and then I start thinking about officiating and how the shortage, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking about, you know, how do we find more officials? You know, how do we find these officials that have courage, the commitment, you know, the teamwork, all this kind of, all the things I used to look for in good officials. And I'm thinking about that, and I thought, well, what about these veterans? I mean, did they not have to have courage? Did they not have to have commitment, a mission, teamwork? And so I thought about, could we put together a foundation that brings veterans into officiating so they could be part of their community again? so they could be role models again. So I'm driving to Oregon, and I'm thinking like, what have I done with my life? Try to tell people what's a catch? Try to tell them what's pass interference? What's that mean? By telling them that, have I left this place in a better place than it was when I got involved? Is that my legacy, which I think we all really want to have a legacy, even though so many people deny it? And so I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking, this could be cool. This could be really good. And so then I'm thinking about, man, if we could get the homeless guys in LA, if we could get them started and doing these things. And so all of a sudden I'm driving from Sacramento and I'm going like, oh, geez, I'm going 85 miles an hour when I'm supposed to be going 65 miles an hour because I'm pumped. And then every trip I stop and get gas in Weed, California. And so I'm pumping my gas in Weed, California. I'm thinking about this. And it's like from somewhere this name came up, battlefields to ball fields, in my head, from the battlefields to the ball fields. And so I drove like a maniac to Oregon, up Highway 97, you know, going like it was 55 miles an hour. I'm sure I was going 75, 80. I was so pumped about this. I got there, talked to my friends. They thought it was a great idea. Came back, went to Fox, said to Eric Shanks, I'm gonna start a foundation. And he rolled his eyes like, yeah, everybody does. And I explained to him what it was, and he said, this is really cool. This was a really cool idea. So in our little world with battlefields to ball fields, we have now over 500 veterans and actives that we have brought into officiating. And we pay their entire expense that it takes to officiate, which is expensive when you have to pay for all your uniform and your equipment and your dues and the local associations and all that stuff. And we have hit the 500 mark. It's not, it doesn't solve the issue. I mean, but it's like, to me, when I heard somebody speak the other day, for little things like that you do, it's like a little piece of the puzzle. And I feel like now through this, because there is some phenomenal stories of veterans whose lives have been changed by going on the field and working with kids and developing this group of new friends that, you know, they're all your friends have become these officials because you all understand the frustrations and stuff. And some of the stories, I mean, I'm humbled by them. I mean, in reality, reality, I personally feel like I'm worth the quarter it took to buy the Coke. Because it's something that I've done that means a lot more to me. I shouldn't say that to my bosses at Fox who might hear this, but it means a lot more to me than what I do at Fox, than going to Green Bay and freezing my ass off and sitting there and saying, you know, no, that's a incomplete pass, not a catch and a fumble. What I do now, when a lady called me, and I went back to Rochester, New York, where we have a group of veterans that are officiating now back there. And I went back there to, we staged a little golf event. And she said, she pulled me by the shirt and said, you saved his life. I said, I saved his life? Jamison Pilgrim, you saved his life. His fiance, she said, I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to go to work every day because I was worried about what I was going to come home to. And one day I came down, he had this smile on his face, and he said, I think I found it. And he went from a guy that was hardly even going out of the house, didn't have a job, nothing. Now he officiates 3 sports and has a job. He got a job 3 months after starting officiating. And they got married. And while I don't know that I saved his life, but being involved in sports and being involved in officiating saved his life. And for those things, we had a guy just 2 days ago, again in Rochester. He made it through the Veterans Court. He was arrested, and they have a plan back there. If you go to a Veterans Court and if you follow their guidelines over a 6-month period and do this reporting thing, they'll expunge from your record. This guy made it through the whole court, and guess what the first thing he did was? Applied for a scholarship to Battlefields to Ball Fields, and now he's gonna umpire softball back there. This makes my life.
Mike, thanks so much. Awesome.
I still, according to the clock, I got 9 minutes to go. We could talk football, you know. There's football. Ron Torbert's going to be the referee.
If I were going to ask a question, if I were going to ask a football question, which really diminishes this incredibly powerful story you've just told me, I would say, what, if anything, can or should be done about overtime?
I think it's a complex question. It's never easy. Listen, I was a product of the first one where it was just flip a coin and the first team that scored won. Kick a 48-yard field goal after 4 plays and you win the game. There wasn't a lot of sentiment to change it. And then as the numbers started to reflect, then I was part of the group that took the coaches out to play golf, and while the owners voted on it, because the coaches really didn't even want to change it. And so they're out playing golf, and it got changed while we were all playing golf. Then they're yelling at me because, like, you know, I finagled them to go out and play golf so that these owners who didn't really understand, you know, would vote for this current as we have it now. And I think it's been okay, but I've gone over. I've flipped. And I think it's relatively simple. I mean, I think it should not change in the regular season, but I think it should change when you're one and done in the postseason. And how difficult can it be just to say, hey, each team's going to get the ball once? So if you score a touchdown on your first possession, kick the extra point, the other team gets the ball. And if they score and it's tied, then it becomes sudden death. I think one and done is different than basically 17 games. And I think they'll look at it. The number that's pretty shocking, right, is that is it like 9 of the last 10 overtime games have been won by the team that won the toss? Now, not necessarily in the first possession, but the overtime rule changes in the postseason. It's not a 10-minute limit. You basically start another game. So give each team the opportunity, because I don't think anybody can say that the last 6 games that we've had in the NFL prior to the Super Bowl have been unbelievable. But there was a void. There was a void in the Kansas City-Buffalo game. Yeah. And so I don't like the pick and choose, spot and choose, or whatever John Harbaugh's thing was, you know, and Peter King's thing that he wrote about. Okay, each team gets the opportunity to, and if the other first team scores and the other one comes down, they score, they got to go for 2, whatever. But I think, you know, you have to listen to fans. I mean, you really do. You know, one of my guiding lights was 50 drunks in a bar. I mean, because I always said, if 50 drunks in a bar thought that Tom Brady fumbled against the Oakland Raiders back in 2001, if 50 guys in a bar thought that was a fumble, then damn it, it ought to be a fumble. But then the rule made it not a fumble. If 50 guys in a bar thought that Calvin Johnson caught the ball in 2010, my first year at Fox, my first time I went on camera, if 50 drunk guys in a bar thought it was a catch, then it ought to be a catch. And eventually, if Des Bryant's play, if 50 people in a bar thought that was a catch, it ought to be a catch. Well, guess what? The Tom Brady play against the Raiders is now a fumble. The Des Bryant incomplete pass in the playoffs is now a catch. And Calvin Johnson's play in the end zone is now a catch. So if you look, I'd say, well, those 50 drunks in a bar must have known something, because then they changed the rule. So in replay, I mean, in the overtime, come on. I mean, let's just give each team in the postseason the ball. And the third possession just becomes, if it's still tied, it becomes overtime.
You
Not
did
rocket
make the right
science.
call on TV in saying that Calvin Johnson's was not a catch, even though everyone, including those 50 drunks, would have said it was.
It was my first call, and
That's pressure.
I didn't know what to expect, and I was petrified. I was petrified because I really wasn't sure. And Fox wasn't even going to sure how, they weren't quite sure how they were going to use me, but they stuck me in the studio and said, well, we'll bring you on in case something happens that maybe you can, and then boom, this happens, and then Tom Brenneman and Brian Billick, they're like going, well, what are they going to do? Is it a catch? And Billick's going, that's a catch, it's a catch. What are they? And I'm like, Mike, what are they going to do? I go, well, the rule says that if you're going to the ground, you have to hold on to the ball when you hit the ground. And Billy's going, but he had the ball. He had the ball, took 3 steps, and then reached out. And I said, tell me, what do you think? Well, the rules. And finally, like, Billy got mad at me and said, well, what are they going to do? I mean, I said, based on the rule, I think they're going to leave this incomplete. And he went, no way, he yelled. And then Gene Steratore is the guy, came out from under the hood and said, after reviewing the play, the ruling of incomplete pass stands. I almost fell off the chair, because if I'd have missed my first one on a game-winning thing, I'd probably been fired the next day. And Jay Glazer came running in and said, you hit a grand slam on your first, you hit a grand slam. The league called me and said, this was amazing, this is great. You took all the criticism off of the officials and put it on the rule. This is great. This is a great role. And the next week, then I disagreed with the call, and the league called me and told me they hated me. But, you know, but it's just the nature of the beast. The nature of the beast, I guess.
Mike, you let this one go into overtime, this interview. I really appreciate it. Great job.
Thank you, Sam. It's
And
great.
enjoy the Super Bowl. You had the one, you had the Chiefs winning that Super Bowl. So your next one is
Next year. So
next year in Arizona.
We have 2 of the next 3, actually, the way it falls. So
Arizona and New Orleans?
Arizona and New Orleans. And so I plan to be around until New Orleans, and if I make it that long, and then I think it'll probably be time to ride off in the sunset, maybe.
We made some news here. You're in the booth now with Joe and Troy, and I think it's a great trio.
I truly love being in the booth with them, and maybe not for the reasons that you would think. You know, I could say, geez, wow, just to be standing 4 feet from Troy Aikman is like, whoa, it's Troy. But it's not that. It's just the fact that they're so open to me. And the one thing I found out about both Joe and Troy, I think it's pretty true in others too, but they want to be right. They do not want to be wrong. They don't want to misquote a rule. And when I'm standing right there, and I have these buttons, so it's fascinating. If there's a pass interference call, and Troy is saying, and it starts, I can listen to, obviously I hear him, and if he starts to go down the path of, you know, I don't think that's a good call, but it's like a hook and turn, it's a good call. I'll say, Troy, it's a hook and turn. They turn before the ball gets there. So Troy goes, I don't think it's really a go. But then again, it looks like a hook and turn. You know?
That's how the magic's made.
And they're so open to me to talk to them in their ears, even while they're talking. And sometimes, we had a play, and I'll end it with this in my relationship with them. We had to play a 4th down fumble inside of 2 minutes in a game a couple years ago. It was a great play, but the quarterback fumbled, the lineman picked it up and ran it in the end zone, and Joe's going, he's at the 20, it's getting it. And I said to Troy, and the thing is, it's a fumble inside of 2 minutes. They got to bring it back to the spot of the fumble. So Joe finishes, and Troy said, yeah, Joe, that was great, but it's a fumble inside of 2 minutes. And he got all these accolades for knowing the rule. He didn't have any damn idea, but I told him.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mike.
You got it, Sam.